me try this again. All right, so as I said a minute ago, we want to teach you some advanced research skills because, again, these are skills that you're going to take with you as you move along your career in college. So, when you're thinking about researching on a do you see the question now? Okay, excellent. When you think about doing research on a database, which is that collection of sources that have been arranged for you and organized for you and you know, collated by specific purposes, why do you think that might yield better results than an internet search? And again, you should just be able to type, and I can see it as you're typing it. Okay, Zoe, that's a great answer. Sarah, I see where you're going with that, and that is absolutely correct. Yeah, Destiny, I see where you're going with that. Excellent. Ooh, Tian, that's really good. Joe Schmo. I love that. Okay, we've got some good stuff here. I'm actually going to show these to you because they're really good. I think you guys already are getting this. You're getting more limited results. You're getting better results, more truthful, more good results, right? More qualified sources. So you're going to get actual peer-reviewed research, people who have credentials to write about the thing. Not just random news articles, which you know, news outlets can be very biased, right? Yeah, it's not just something that somebody would say. These things are reviewed and vetted for their accuracy. Okay, good. Organization. Yep, good. Some internet sources are not always filled with correct information. Yeah, like I always tell my dad, hey dad, not everything you see on YouTube is true. He sees a lot on YouTube, he tells me about it. I'm like, Dad, curated, good, awesome. Okay, good. Scammy websites, but there's lots of those, that's a good point. And yeah, you're not just getting some Joe Schmo's blog, you're getting some good stuff. All right, I think we understand this pretty well, good. So again, why do you want to choose a database over websites? You're going to have that, I think Sarah spoke to that idea of authority, like you're going to get people who actually know what they're talking about, authors that have credentials to write about the topics. You're not going to get your results on the number of hits, right? The popularity of the article is not the reason why you're going to get the article like you might on Google. Hopefully you'll get more relevance, like you're going to find things, and a couple of you mentioned that, you're going to get more specific information for your topic. There's also some awesome search features on databases, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And then you do have access to actual published information, which is much better than a lot of the things we see on the internet. Okay, so, but something you need to know about searching on a database, and this is the stuff that I'm telling you need to absorb, right? It's not natural language searching. You know what, like how many of you go on to Google or wherever you guys search now, and just type a question? You know, what is the capital of blah, 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 right? You just use natural language, you ask it a question. I do that all the time. That's not how you do searches in databases. Databases use this thing called Boolean logic, and that's what we're going to talk about today. There are advanced search strategies in databases that can help you limit your results more effectively. And you know, when you're searching, it's a good idea to have those keywords in mind. We'll talk about that. And then you can limit things by dates. What, you know, you don't want to get something from 1990 if you're writing about EVs, right? That's some pretty old writing, not going to be applicable to you. You can also limit to full text so that you're only getting articles that you actually have access to, which is very frustrating if you don't select that particular search option. Okay, so let's do a little bit of work with figuring out keywords. We're going to keep a very simple kind of topic. So again, you have to pull the keywords, and I think for this particular paper that should be pretty simple. This will be a good introduction to that. So here's my research question. Does playing video games increase the chance that children will be violent? So I'm asking you to tell me, what do you think the key words are? Not phrases, just words. What are the key words in that research question? Sophia, you're on the right track. Yep, Sarah, you nailed that. Okay, Destiny, good. Awesome. So what I'm getting from most of you would be video games. Obviously, that's the central idea. Children. And then what's the last word? Violent. Those are definitely the key words there for sure. Okay. So when you're searching, one of the tips I want to give you would be like, sometimes you have to think of alternative terminology, because sometimes you're going to search something. The example I always give is when we do a conspiracy theory essay next semester, students will oftentimes want to do the chemtrails conspiracy theory. And we have found that if you search chemtrails in the databases, you don't get much. And that's because the actual scientific term for chemtrails, does anybody know what it is? Is actually contrails. So sometimes you have to understand that maybe the thing that you know under layman's terms in research is called something completely different. But also just tweaking some of these search terms can make a big difference. So let's say you were going to do like a little chart to kind of figure out alternatives to these terms. So we had video games, children, violence. I would look down this list and say, oh yeah, first person shooting might be a search term you want to look at, because a lot of people think those are very detrimental to kids, right? And do we really want to use children? Who's more likely to be playing these games? What age group? Teenagers. Yeah, I would say teenagers. Obviously, infants aren't playing, but this is just a brainstorm, right? And then, some other words for violence. Maybe it's not really that they make people violent. Maybe they make people more aggressive or cruel, or affects behavior. So you have to think about, what kind of alternative terms you might use when you're doing these searches to get more results. Okay, the first strategy we're going to talk about would be quotation marks. This is really important if your phrase has multiple words in it, and you don't want to end up with a bunch of results that are not applicable. So the example that they give here is the term wage gap. If I just put wage gap in a database search, it's going to find everything that has wage and everything that has gap, and maybe a few things that have both wage and gap. Okay, so it's not going to be a very good search. However, if you put quotation marks around the term wage gap, you're only gonna, the database is only gonna find articles and documents that have wage and gap right next to each other. Can you see how that would really limit the search? That would really help you. Okay. And another example down here is, literarily speaking, if you were reading Hamlet and you wanted to find some articles on Hamlet's famous soliloquy, to be or not to be, if you were to type to be or not to be and no quotation marks, you're not going to get anything probably, especially because there's or and not, which are part of the Boolean logic processors. So you'd want to place that in quotation marks. Okay, so that's using quotation marks. Another thing you can do is called wildcard and truncation. So this would allow you to just type a partial term in and then use an asterisk, so that you can get all the variations of that term. Okay. So for example, maybe you're talking about a female specific topic and you want to have women or woman. If you just put the asterisk there, it's going to find both of those. Okay. And then music would find music, musical, musician, musicians, musicality, etc. So you could finish the word. Another one would be like, if you were doing something related to education, educators, you can truncate that and just put, educate, and then put the asterisk there. It's going to find all those terms related, or that would finish that word for you. Okay. So when you are doing these searches in the database for your topic, so try to be thinking about how you might use some of these particular methods. But I also want to move into probably the most powerful one, which is the Boolean logic operators. So you guys know Venn diagrams. You don't often see them necessarily in an ELA class, sometimes, but we're going to talk about them now. So who are my math people? You guys recognize these? Yeah, what is that? You guys remember? Yeah, I think the second one's the union, right? I mean, I'm not a math person, but so we're gonna look at how you're gonna use 3 little words to narrow your research. Okay. If you're using "and" between 2 search terms, it's going to limit to articles that contain both of those terms only, like this part right here, right? If you are using "or," it's going to give you all of the articles that contain one of those terms, the other term, or both of those terms, all of it, right? And then there's a final one called "not." I don't use it a ton, but occasionally. That's where you're going to indicate that you don't want one specific term, you only want this term, okay? It's gonna limit that. So, I just talked about all of that. So if you put an "and" between your terms, you're going to get a much more limited result because the article would have to have both of those terms. So for example, if you looked up "children" and "travel," you're only gonna find articles that contain "children" and "travel." This is probably the most frequently used one that I would use. So for example, if I'm looking at, if I want to look at geriatric depression, right? I'm probably going to do an "and" search, geriatric and depression. And that's going to give me articles that have both geriatric and depression mentioned in the article. Okay. Or as you're actually broadening the search, you're not limiting it as much. And an example of this would be if you're looking at autopsy and you're thinking, okay, well, there's another term. This is just like that chemtrails thing. I might do this for chemtrails too, like chemtrails or contrails. If you're a postmortem is the same thing as an autopsy. So you might say postmortem or autopsy, and that's going to give you a larger result. Another example would be like if you're doing teenagers. What's the more technical term for teenager? Adolescent. So I might do teenager or adolescent. That's going to give you all of those results. And then finally, a "not," right? This one's a little bit different in terms of like people understanding how to use this. Let's pull up my example here. So, for example, if you have a word that has multiple meanings, you might want to use "not." Now, what do people call soccer in Europe and everywhere else in the world? Football, right? So if I were to use the term "football," I'm searching for something related to football, I might end up with a lot of European or South American or whatever articles that are actually not talking about American football, they're talking about soccer, right? And so this is an instance where you might want to use this. And it's going to limit your results to only that one term. Another example might be, I'm looking up articles about bats, like the animal bat, right? But bat has other meanings, right? So I keep getting these articles about baseball bats. I don't want that. So I might put bats, not baseball, just to make sure I'm not getting, because you're going to get a bunch of stuff that you don't necessarily want. Okay. All right, and just really quickly, Another thing, you're gonna see that like if you do a predictive text search, it does this automatically, which is pretty wild. In math, again, more math stuff, right? If you put something in parentheses, what happens in a math equation? What are you supposed to do with that? You do that first, right? And this is the same logic that you see in database searches. If you put something in parentheses, it's going to say, oh, I should do that first. I don't use this very often, maybe rarely, but it's called nesting when you do this. So, hey, I want you to search these terms, make that the priority, or I'm gonna differentiate these terms in some way, and then I'm gonna add something else. So the example here is milk or dark in parentheses and chocolate. So it should find documents that mention milk chocolate or dark chocolate. Sounds amazing, right? That's called nesting.
They didn't have hot chocolate at Dunkin'.
They what?
They're out of hot chocolate at Dunkin'.
How can that possibly be the case?
Until they get the trunk. I'm so sad.
All right, and then we're gonna look at this hopefully today, real briefly. You should always pick an advanced search. Advanced search is gonna give you multiple search boxes and automatically give you those Boolean operator boxes that you can choose from. It allows you to pick that you only want full text articles. It's gonna allow you to limit by the publication date, source type, all of this stuff that's gonna help you with your search. Okay. Some other things before we move on. Use that predictive text. You're gonna see in, when you go to these databases, you'll start typing something and it's going to like guess what you're going to type, just like in everything else right now. Use that. Take their, it's sort of like a suggestion, right? Take that suggestion. Try to document related words as you're conducting your research, and maybe those are things that you haven't considered before. So example, the chemtrails, contrails thing. You come across an article that talks about contrails when you've been looking for chemtrails, you're like, wait a minute, I should definitely start looking at that term as well. Review those limiters to see if your searches could be more relevant. And then you guys, even though we're under this weird law that high school students, they can't collect data on you, you are in a college class. Therefore, when you are in a database, you can make an account, okay? If you make an account, it makes it easier to save what you find. I also would suggest emailing it to yourself. I always do it that way, okay? And then finally, don't give up. Research is called research for a reason. It's very time consuming and sometimes very frustrating. You may not find what you're looking for on the first try. It might take multiple tries. All right, so what I'm gonna ask you to do is head over to, there it is. Get rid of this stuff that was not working earlier. We're gonna take a journey, a magical journey to Maag Library. So MAAG.ysu.edu, and you should get a page that looks like this. And most college library websites are very similar. They're set up very similarly. So no matter where you go next year, it should look something like this. Kent's looks exactly like this. Okay, is that loading for you? I see heads nodding. Okay, so maag.ysu.edu. You guys are gonna go into these A to Z research databases. That's where we're headed. Okay. And you're gonna see the setup for this is you see 316 databases. I think TCTC has like 8 or 9. You have 316 at your fingertips here. Lots of content specific ones, which we'll get into next semester. What I'd like you to do is stay in the all, and we're gonna stay in the A's because probably the most general use, most familiar databases to most students would be Academic Search. So I'd like you to open that. You may need to sign into your YSU account. Is it asking you to do that? Is anybody lost, scared, or confused? Nick? Are you on the this page? Well, this one? Yeah, so we're going to this A to Z research databases. Okay. You were there, and then we're searching this, this is like on the first page that automatically pops up, Academic Search Complete. And then I know we're running out of time. See, it's asking me for my password. I'll have to authenticate, I'm sure. And guys, we'll start in the same location tomorrow, but I just want to show you very quickly. I would immediately, see this over here? Immediately go to that. And do you see these? You can drop these down. These are the Boolean operators that we were just talking about. Just to give you an idea of what I meant by predictive text. Look at what happens. Let's say I want to look at remote work. There it is. I'm going to hit that. Maybe I want to put it in quotation marks to make sure I'm not getting results that are remote and work separately. And then maybe I want to do something like, are remote workers really productive workers? So look at that. Look at what happens here. Productivity, or efficiency, or performance. I'm gonna try that. Down here, I'm always going to select that full text. I'm going to select the last 5 years down here, and then you can kind of see what happens with the search. And then tomorrow we'll start by looking at, what you end up getting, how you can determine what's a popular article, what's a journal article, and we'll just continue to try to work through these search techniques, okay? I know the bell's gonna ring shortly. And I know that was a lot of information, so. Hopefully this worked.